sejahtera kepada Encik Saiful. Nama saya Elisa Kong Singro dari kelas 1. Hari ini saya ingin membentangkan tentang penilaian kehilangan pendengaran dan pertuturan. Sekarang saya ingin membincangkan tentang definisi kehilangan pendengaran dan pertuturan dalam kalangan murid kurang upaya. Bagi maksud kehilangan pendengaran merujuk kepada ketidakupayaan murid untuk mendengar bunyi pada tahap yang normal yang boleh mengganggu komunikasi dan perkembangan bahasa. Ia juga boleh dikategorikan kepada tahap ringan, sederhana, teruk dan sangat teruk serta terdiri daripada jenis kognitif, sensorineural atau campuran. Murid dengan kehilangan pendengaran yang teruk atau sangat teruk sering mengalami kesukaran untuk bertutur kerana mereka tidak dapat mendengar dan meniru bunyi dengan betul. Oleh itu, inovasi awal seperti alat bantu dengar, terapi pertuturan dan pengajaran berbantukan visual amat penting dalam membantu mereka berkomunikasi dengan lebih baik.
Bercakap dan mendengar merupakan aktiviti harian yang mudah dan sering dilakukan tanpa usaha yang melampau. Namun, ramai antara kita endah tak endah kepentingan telinga dan dera pendengaran dan jarang mengenalinya dengan lebih terperinci. Tahukah anda bahawa keupayaan telinga anda amat mengagumkan? Telinga boleh mendengar lebih daripada 200,000 nada yang berbeza dan mampu memproses informasi dalam masa sesaat. Kebolehan ini membantu kita mengenal pasti bunyi, menafsir bunyi tersebut untuk dijadikan pertuturan bahasa dan secara langsung memahami maksud perkataan yang dituturkan. Hebat kan? Namun, sebahagian daripada kita dilahirkan dengan masalah pendengaran. Sekiranya anak-anak bermasalah pendengaran tidak dapat rawatan awal, anak-anak ini akan mengalami kesukaran seperti berikut. Sukar untuk mendengar bunyi di sekeliling mereka, sukar memahami bunyi di sekeliling mereka, sukar membuat dan menggabungkan bunyi ucapan untuk membentuk kata-kata yang tepat, sukar untuk membangunkan pembendaraan kata yang berfungsi, sukar merangka ayat berdasarkan peringkat umur masing-masing untuk meminta, memberi komen dan bertanya, sukar untuk menggunakan tata bahasa yang betul, sukar memahami pertuturan orang lain, sukar mengikuti arahan di tempat yang senyap dan bising, sukar mengekalkan perhatian dan mengawal tingkah laku, sukar mengikut perbualan dengan orang ramai, sukar mendengar dan belajar di dalam bilik darjah, dan sukar belajar membaca. Untuk membantu anak-anak yang mengalami masalah pendengaran, penjaga dan ibu bapa digalakkan mendapat bantuan pakar audiologi untuk mengukur tahap pendengaran anak-anak tersebut. Kita sering berpendapat bahawa kita mendengar dengan telinga, namun sebenarnya kita mendengar dengan otak kita. Telinga merupakan organ yang membantu menyalurkan bunyi dan informasi bunyian ke otak. Sekiranya kita anggapkan telinga adalah satu pintu masuk, jadi kita boleh juga menganggap kehilangan pendengaran merupakan masalah di pintu tersebut. Dengan itu, untuk membantu anak-anak bermasalah pendengaran mendapat akses informasi bunyian untuk ditafsirkan menjadi pertuturan, penjaga dan ibu bapa perlu membuka pintu itu lebih luas untuk gelombang bunyi melaluinya. Untuk memahami proses pendengaran dengan lebih lanjut, hubungi pakar anda atau lawati laman web kami seperti yang tertera.
Hari ini saya ingin menggunakan Ahmad sebagai contoh kes kehilangan pertuturan dan kehilangan pendengaran. Ahmad adalah seorang murid yang berumur 12 tahun dari Malaysia. Dia mengalami masalah kehilangan pendengaran sejak lahir akibat komplikasi semasa melahirkan. Kecacatan pendengarannya juga menjejaskan kemampuannya untuk bercakap dengan jelas kerana yang bersifat sensorineural tahap sangat teruk menyebabkan dia tidak dapat mendengar bunyi dengan jelas, sekaligus akan menjejaskan keupayaannya untuk bertutur dengan baik. Ketidakupayaan amat untuk mendengar bunyi pertuturan di sekelilingnya menjadikan proses pembelajaran bahasa yang lebih mencabar, dan dia juga bergantung kepada bahasa isyarat dan alat bantu komunikasi supaya dia boleh berinteraksi dengan rakan dan guru dengan lebih baik. Jenis kehilangan pendengaran amat adalah kehilangan pendengaran sensorineural. Ia disebabkan oleh kerosakan pada telinga dalam atau saraf pendengaran. Kerosakan ini mungkin berlaku sejak lahir atau disebabkan oleh faktor seperti jangkitan semasa kecil, pendedahan kepada bunyi bising yang kuat, atau komplikasi perubatan. Selain itu, tahap kehilangan pendengaran amat yang berdasarkan audiogram amat mungkin mengalami kehilangan pendengaran sederhana hingga teruk, iaitu 40 hingga 90 dB. Ini bermaknanya amat sukar mendengar perbualan normal dan hanya boleh mendengar bunyi yang kuat atau yang jelas. Seterusnya, jenis kehilangan pertuturan amat adalah gangguan artikulasi. Amat mungkin mengalami kesukaran untuk menghasilkan bunyi pertuturan yang jelas. Contohnya, menggantikan bunyi S dengan T atau P dengan B. Ini disebabkan oleh ketidakupayaan untuk mendengar dan menyesuaikan bunyi yang dihasilkan. Keterbatasan perbendaharaan kata amat mungkin mempunyai perbendaharaan kata yang terhad. Hal ini dikatakan demikian kerana dia tidak terdedah kepada bunyi dan perkataan secara mencukupi. Ini boleh menjejaskan kemahiran berkomunikasi dan pemahaman bahasa. Ini adalah contoh kaedah penilaian kehilangan pendengaran, iaitu ujian audiometri dan acoustic emissions, iaitu OAE.
Croeso. Welcome to this video on audiograms. After this video, you should be able to describe the process of audiometry, demonstrate an understanding of how an audiogram links to tuning fork tests, diagnose normal hearing from an audiogram, diagnose conductive and sensory neural hearing loss from audiograms, and diagnose common causes of hearing loss from audiograms. Let's first quickly recap the bedside hearing assessments you will have practiced during the ENT examination, starting with Rinne's test, which compares air conduction to bone conduction. Air conduction involves sound being funneled via the pinna into the ear canal, where it passes through the tympanic membrane and ossicles. Sound is amplified here because movements of the stapes footplate are translated into movements of fluid within the cochlea, resulting in neural stimulation. Remember, in Rinne's test, if air conduction is louder than bone conduction, this is normal and shows sound can go through the middle ear amplifier. This is a positive Rinne's test. During bone conduction, however, sound misses the ossicles and there is direct vibration of the inner ear fluids with no amplification. If bone conduction is louder, this suggests that there is a defect, either preventing the sound's route to the cochlea or its amplification. This is a negative Rinne's test. Weber's test is a little bit more confusing to interpret. Let's say one ear was positive in Rinne's test, i.e. bone conduction was greater than air conduction, shown here as a cross on the left ear. If Weber's lateralizes towards the good ear, the hearing loss is sensory neural. However, if it lateralizes towards the affected ear, the hearing loss is conductive. This being said, the nature of hearing loss is more reliably measured using the pure tone audiometry when it is available. An audiogram is a graphical representation of a person's ability to hear at different standardized frequencies. It builds on what you may have found with Rinne's and Weber's tests. Whilst you are unlikely to be creating an audiogram yourself, it is important to know how they are done in order to interpret them effectively. Firstly, the ears are cleaned of wax and discharge. Then the patient is placed in a soundproof room and pure tones over a range of frequencies are delivered to the patient through headphones at varying intervals and intensities. Each ear is tested separately. The patient presses a button when they can hear a noise. The first noise played should be the one that the patient can hear, so the patient knows what the sound is and which ear they should be hearing it in. Once the patient presses the button, the noise is reduced in frequency by 10 decibels until the patient can no longer hear it. The process is repeated, but a bone oscillator is placed over the mastoid process, which vibrates at different frequencies. This vibration will travel directly to the cochlea and stimulate it. This means that we can test the function of the cochlea separately. The frequencies and intensity at which some common noises are heard can be shown in an audiogram. Although rarely done in practice, you can plot the average levels for speech, which forms the speech banana. You do not need to learn this, but bear it in mind as it nicely demonstrates why losing hearing at certain frequencies affects how a person hears speech, and therefore how they are able to communicate. This is a blank audiogram. Frequency is along the x-axis in hertz, and the intensity is along the y-axis in decibels. Normal hearing for an adult is between 0 and 20 decibels across all frequencies. A key is provided on the right of the graph, as symbols may vary. With this patient, we'll test the right ear first. Starting at a frequency of 1000 Hz, a noise is played that the patient can hear comfortably. The intensity is lowered in 10 decibel steps until they can no longer hear it. Once they can't hear it, the volume is adjusted up and down in 5 decibel steps until a threshold that the patient hears 50% of the time is reached, and then a mark is made. Next, the patient is played a noise at 2000 Hz at 25 decibels. They can hear it, so it is reduced to 15 decibels. They can no longer hear it, so now it is increased to 20 decibels. The patient presses the button and another mark is made. The process is continued all the way to 8000 Hz and then back to 250 and 500 Hz before it is repeated at 1000 Hz. The whole thing is also repeated in the left ear. As the patient was consistently able to hear the noises below 20 decibels, they have normal air conduction in both ears. As air conduction was normal bilaterally, they have normal hearing in both ears. If you were examining this patient with a tuning fork, Rinne's would be positive bilaterally and Weber's would not lateralize. Conductive hearing loss is the name given when the sound is unable to properly reach the cochlear nerve. Regardless of whether the pathology is in the outer ear, tympanic membrane or the middle ear, the sound is unable to travel to the middle ear and is therefore not amplified as would be normal. There are many different reasons for this, such as otitis media, perforation, wax, otitis externa, otosclerosis, foreign objects, and cholesteatoma. Now let's look at how conductive hearing loss presents on an audiogram. The test is carried out as before. Whilst the right ear appears normal, this time the patient's left ear falls around the 60 decibel mark. They have hearing loss in their left ear. At the moment, we cannot tell if this is conductive or sensory. We need to know the bone conduction. In this case, the patient records the following plot points, all of which fall below 20 decibels, indicating normal bone conduction. This demonstrates that a nerve is working appropriately, but there is a defect in the ear canal, tympanic membrane or ossicles. Therefore, this patient has conductive hearing loss in their left ear, possibly as a result of otitis media, perforation, cholesteatoma, or middle ear tumour. Rinne's would be negative on the left, and Weber's would lateralise to the left. Sensorineural hearing loss is the name given when the pathology is beyond the middle ear. Sound is able to be transmitted through to the inner ear, but due to disease, it cannot be transduced into neural activity by the cochlea and transmitted by the nerve. There are many different reasons for this, such as acoustic neuroma, Meniere's disease, ototoxicity, labyrinthitis, noise damage, head trauma, and presbyacusis. A patient produces an audiogram as before, demonstrating hearing loss in their left ear, particularly in the higher frequencies. Once again, the test is repeated for bone conduction. However, this time, bone conduction is also deficient, demonstrating that there must be a problem with the cochlea or nerve and making this unilateral sensorineural hearing loss. In this instance, Rinne's would be positive bilaterally, but Weber's would lateralise to the right. If you see an audiogram like this, you must first rule out an acoustic neuroma and organise an MRI scan. Other differentials could be surgical damage or noise trauma. Let's look at some common conditions and their audiograms, which you may be asked to interpret either on the wards, in clinics, or during exams. This audiogram shows bilateral high-frequency hearing loss. It is worth noting here that if bone conduction follows the same pattern as air conduction, it is often not displayed on the audiogram simply to make it more legible. Therefore, this is a sensorineural hearing loss and is typical of presbyacusis or hearing loss of old age. A particular issue for those suffering from presbyacusis is listening to speech. If you refer back to the speech banana, you can see that high-frequency sounds such as f, s, ch, and sh, and many consonants will be difficult to hear. As the loss is bilateral, you are not likely to see anything unusual on tuning fork testing other than a gross hearing difficulty. This demonstrates the usefulness of an audiogram. The abnormal part of this audiogram is the dip at 4K. This has affected both ears and can be assumed to have affected bone conduction as well because it's not shown. This is noise-induced hearing loss. People who are consistently exposed to loud noises, such as construction workers, musicians, or military personnel, for example, may present with bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. Whether the damage is acute or chronic, the loud sound overstimulates the fragile hair cells, leading to their permanent injury or death. Higher frequencies are more damaging to the hair cells. Therefore, noise-induced hearing loss has a typical tick appearance on audiogram around the 4,000 mark. This patient has a low-frequency unilateral sensorineural hearing loss, typical of Meniere's disease. In Meniere's disease, the hearing loss fluctuates, which is highly unusual. However, the hearing loss will become permanent and progressive and cannot be prevented even with treatment. In this instance, Rinne's would be positive bilaterally and Weber's would lateralise to the right, as we use a low-frequency 512 Hz tuning fork. If you see an asymmetric sensory loss like this, you must first rule out an acoustic neuroma and organise an MRI scan. In this audiogram, both ears are affected and both show bone and air conduction deficits. Therefore, this is bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. Although rare in the UK, a possible differential for bilateral sensorineural hearing loss is ototoxicity. It can be caused by a number of drugs, such as aminoglycosides such as gentamicin, loop diuretics, or aspirin if taken in high enough quantities. Other differential diagnoses could be trauma or bilateral acoustic neuromas if the patient suffers from neurofibromatosis 2, for example. Like before, this audiogram shows damage to both ears. However, bone conduction is preserved, indicating that this is a bilateral conductive hearing loss. The commonest cause of this appearance is glue ear. Bilateral perforations is a possibility, as is otosclerosis. Otosclerosis is a condition that lays down spongy bone around the stapes footplate. It is commoner in younger women and has genetic, hormonal, and viral origins. This time, there has been little to no response at all from the left ear. This is known as dead ear. The arrows demonstrate that the machine was not loud enough for the patient to register a response. Although there appears to be a response to an 80 decibel noise at 250 Hz, do not be fooled into thinking the ear is working. This is the vibrotactile response. The patient is feeling the sound rather than hearing it. Common causes of a dead ear would be labyrinthitis, accidental trauma to the temporal bone, and post-surgical, if they've previously had an acoustic neuroma removed, for example. In this instance, Rinnies would be positive bilaterally, but Weber's would lateralize to the right. In this example, there is a defect in the left ear. Air conduction is significantly below normal, and so is bone conduction. However, there is a large gap between the air and bone conduction lines, meaning that there is both a sensory neural and a conductive loss. This is known as mixed hearing loss. Possible causes of this picture would be a cholesteatoma if it invades both the middle and inner ear, or trauma. Rinnies and Weber's are of limited value here and are unreliable in mixed losses. At the start of this video, we set out 5 objectives. Firstly, to describe the process of audiometry. Audiometry is done by playing pure tone sounds of different intensities and frequencies and recording which the patient can hear. Second was to demonstrate how audiograms are linked to tuning fork tests. Rinnies and Weber's are bedside tests, and although both measure air and bone conduction, audiograms alter the frequency and intensity and take more consideration of global hearing loss. They can be diagnostic in themselves. Third was to diagnose normal hearing from an audiogram. The plot points for both ears should be above the 20 decibel line. Fourth was to be able to diagnose conductive and sensory neural hearing loss on audiograms. When air conduction is abnormal, look at the bone conduction markers. If they are normal, then this is conductive, such as otitis media. However, if they follow air conduction and are abnormal, this is sensory neural, as in an acoustic neuroma. Finally, you should be able to diagnose common conditions from their audiograms. Although pattern recognition is key, you should also understand why these conditions produce their characteristic audiograms. Important ones to recognise are presbyacusis, noise-induced, many airs, ototoxicity, bilateral conductive, dead ear, and mixed hearing loss. Not forgetting unilateral sensory neural loss, which could be an acoustic neuroma. That completes this tutorial on audiograms. You should now test yourself with the accompanying assessment. Good luck and hwyl fawr.
Kehilangan pertuturan akibat kehilangan pendengaran. Oleh kerana amat tidak dapat mendengar bunyi dengan jelas, ia tidak dapat meniru atau mempelajari bunyi pertuturan secara semula. Jadi, ini akan menyebabkan kelewatan atau kebidaan perkembangan bahasa pertuturan. Contohnya speech delay atau speech lesson. Sekarang saya ingin membentangkan implikasi kehilangan pendengaran dan pertuturan. Ia dibahagikan kepada 4, iaitu pertama, perkembangan bahasa dan komunikasi. Murid yang mengalami kehilangan pendengaran sering mengalami kelewatan dalam perkembangan bahasa. Hal ini dikatakan demikian kerana mereka tidak dapat mendengar dan meniru bunyi pertuturan. Ini akan menyebabkan kesukaran mereka untuk memahami dan menggunakan bahasa dalam harian. Selain itu, tanpa pendedahan kepada bunyi dan perkataan, murid mungkin mempunyai perbendaharaan kata yang terhad yang boleh menjejaskan kemahiran berkomunikasi. Selain itu, iaitu perkembangan kognitif. Kehilangan pendengaran boleh menjejaskan keupayaan murid untuk memproses maklumat dengan cepat dan tepat yang boleh menjejaskan pemahaman dan penyelesaian masalah. Murid akan menghadapi kesukaran untuk mengekalkan jumpa dalam persekitaran yang bising atau apabila maklumat disampaikan secara lisan. Yang ketiga adalah mereka mempunyai sokongan khas. Yang pertama, mereka mempunyai alat bantu pendengaran seperti alat dengar atau implan koklear untuk meningkatkan keupayaan mendengar. Mereka juga mempunyai IPG-M Kampus Unhas mempunyai guru yang terlatih untuk murid ketidakupayaan pendengaran. Yang ketiga adalah kaedah pengajaran alternatif. Penggunaan kaedah pengajaran visual, bahasa isyarat atau teknologi bantu boleh membantu murid lebih memahami dan mengikuti pelajaran dengan lebih baik. Yang akhirnya adalah pencapaian akademik. Murid akan ketinggalan dalam pelajaran. Hal ini dikatakan demikian kerana mereka tidak dapat mengikuti pengajaran yang disampaikan secara lisan oleh guru mereka di dalam kelas. Ini boleh menjejaskan pencapaian dalam semua subjek, terutamanya yang memerlukan kemahiran mendengar dan betul. Kehilangan pendengaran sering dikaitkan dengan kesukaran dalam kemahiran literasi, termasuklah membaca dan menulis, kerana murid tidak dapat menghubungkan bunyi dengan huruf dan perkataan. Data instrumen penilaian. Audiogram menunjukkan ambang pendengaran 50 dB. Ujian artikulasi menunjukkan kesukaran sebutan konsonan tertentu. Pemerhatian dalam kelas menunjukkan kesukaran memahami arahan guru dan berkomunikasi dengan rakan sebaya. Sekarang saya ingin membincangkan tentang cadangan intervensi. Yang pertama iaitu intervensi awal. Pengesanan dan intervensi awal adalah sangat penting untuk meminimumkan kesan kehilangan pendengaran dan pertuturan terhadap perkembangan murid. Selain itu, pada pendapat saya, pendidikan inklusif juga sangat penting. Murid perlu ditempatkan dalam persekitaran pembelajaran inklusif yang menyediakan sokongan dan sumber yang diperlukan. Akhirnya, sokongan psikososial. Sokongan psikososial iaitu kaunseling dan program sosial boleh membantu murid mengatasi cabaran emosi dan sosial.
Even a mild hearing loss can have a major impact on all aspects of a child's development. Did you know that at least one child in your class probably has a mild hearing loss? A child with a mild hearing loss can miss up to 50% of what's been said in the classroom. Less than half of children with a mild hearing loss get 5 good GCSEs. The good news is there are some simple things you can do to make a real difference. This short film will give you an idea of what it's like to be a child with a mild hearing loss and top tips on what you can do to help.
Tip 1! This guy bought some fizzy drink and then he went to the...
Close doors and windows and turn off any unused electrical equipment.
And when he came back from the loo, he opened it and it sprayed everywhere, even on the people behind. That's funny. Tip 2!
You can see that it's a landlocked country, which means that it doesn't have a coastline, but you can see some water and they are lakes.
Make sure the classroom is well lit and that I can see your face clearly so I can lip read.
It's La Paz.
Tip 3!
Aidan, I've called your name 3 times.
Get my attention before talking to me.
Aidan, would you like to come and solve this one for me?
Tip 4!
So you've done your planning and we've written our introduction. Are we keeping you awake? And
Make sure I have breaks so I don't get too tired.
And now, let's take a 5-minute break.
Tip 5!
Now we're going to write our conclusions. And we have
There is lots of technology available, such as sound-filled systems, which project your voice across the classroom.
And now you've got to make sure that you've got conclusions.
For more information on how to support pupils with a mild hearing loss, contact a teacher of the deaf from your local authority, visit our website, or contact our free phone helpline. We also have a range of resources for mainstream teachers that you may find useful. supporting the achievement of deaf children, creating good listening conditions for learning and education, and our popular Look Smile Chat Deaf Awareness Pack.
Kesimpulannya, penilaian awal memainkan peranan yang penting dalam mengenal pasti tahap kehilangan pendengaran dan pertuturan murid, sekaligus dapat membantu dalam perancangan intervensi yang sesuai. Selain itu, intervensi awal yang efektif dapat membantu murid mengembangkan kemahiran komunikasi, sosial dan akademik mereka. Seterusnya dapat meningkatkan kualiti hidup mereka secara menyeluruh. Slide ini adalah rujukan. Sekian, terima kasih.